My name's Jack, and for the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to spend some time talking about a topic that I think is probably pretty near and dear to most of you, namely about how to help transform your company, how to do a digital modernization, and then migrate to the cloud. I'm fortunate today because I'll also have a couple guest speakers, Jon Latshaw from Cardinal Health and Harish Nair from Schlumberger. And they're really the experts in this. They've actually gone through this process at their companies, and they're going to talk about some of their experiences and best practices. And so I'm really looking forward to a chance to have a little Q&A with them. In the keynote this morning, you heard Thomas and many other customers and partners talk about digital transformation. As you all know, our world is changing rapidly. Technology has become an integral part of not only our personal lives, but as a part of businesses as well. What's important here is that it's not just for technology companies. It's not just the digital natives. Traditional brick and mortar companies are also becoming technology companies. In order to actually move your business forward, it's now an imperative to really figure out how to take advantage of all the technologies that are available to advance your business, whether or not you're a digital native. For many of you, this transformation has been underway for many years. You've invested in your infrastructure on compute, storage, networking, and data. You've invested a lot in developing new application capabilities, building new applications for the modern era. The big question, though, I think for a lot of CIOs and IT administrators is, how do you accelerate this process of modernization? As your business demands change, you need to start thinking about, well, how do you take advantage of the newest technologies in data analytics? How do you apply ML and look at all the accelerators, all the models, all the new products, how to use TensorFlow in your organization to help you take advantage of what technology is advancing. But at the same time, it's not so easy to just move and focus on all the new technology. You have a large existing footprint. So how do you actually balance the new capabilities with all of your existing requirements and infrastructure? In fact, we often find that a lot of enterprises are saddled with a lot of the legacy. Gartner has done some studies, and this number has stayed constant for quite some time. Roughly 70% of your current IT spend is just keeping the lights on. This means just your existing footprint, your existing applications, infrastructure. And you can't use this to advance your business. But then look at the Forrester study that talks about what is top of mind for enterprises. What do you actually want to get done in your IT? Well, certainly you want to move some applications to the cloud. But at the same time, look at all these new applications, new business demands that also need attention. So the question is, how can you actually address a lot of these requirements and these needs without ignoring the 70% that you really need to keep your business going on a daily basis? So the solution that a lot of people land on is thinking about, how do I optimize and streamline my existing investments so I can take some of those people, take some of those dollars, and reinvest it in the new areas that are important to your business. At the end of the day, cloud is probably one of your best opportunities to do so. But realize it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time to go down this path of modernization and transform your industry, or transform your company. And a lot of times it's going to be figuring out how you want to focus your investments. It's pretty common in your business, just understanding priorities. So how much do you want to divest? How much do you want to invest in new capabilities? How much do you want to fundamentally transform? So with that in mind, you can kind of think forward. So where do I start? I think one thing to really think about is, what are your goals and what are your top priorities for actually moving your organization forward? Are you all about improving efficiency and driving down costs? Are you really trying to focus on adding new value? Or are you trying to just make everyone more productive? Now, a lot of times these priorities and these goals are going to be well aligned, but sometimes you'll find they're actually not, and they're going to be in contention. So it's up to you and your organization to help figure out what is important and what are you trying to accomplish. And that'll help you, as we talk later today, you'll see this can help you figure out a way to make sure that your migration journey is successful. So the rest of my talk, really, the goal is to help you think about some frameworks that we found are helpful for our customers in going through this transformation. The key thing to remember is Migrations don't have to be everything at once. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to move all your workloads. Think carefully about what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. Be thoughtful about how you put together a plan, execute methodically, and pay attention to this. And ultimately, you'll have a much higher likelihood of being successful. And in fact, actually probably making the whole process run faster and more smoothly. All right. So let's start with the first framework I want to talk about. And this is just thinking about applications, the migration from an application or service perspective. So typically, if you look at your enterprise footprint, you'll find that probably 80% of the workloads are still on-prem, and they're still traditional, packaged applications. So these are, oftentimes what we might term as rigid and expensive. You can't do a lot of things with them if you want to scale them up and down, but it's really the monolithic packaged apps. Over time, where we want to get to is cloud-native apps running in the public cloud. We think this is the holy grail for everyone. This has a lot of benefits. Not only do you actually have more agility, but you actually can improve your operation because you can improve your operational efficiency. Developers are happier. But the problem is getting to this state for most applications is pretty challenging. I've talked to lots of customers about their transformation journeys. And a lot of times what I've started to hear is, hey, we've decided we're going to the cloud this year, so we can't rewrite everything. There's a bunch of applications. We just need to move as quickly as possible. So if this is where we want to get to, but it's a little bit challenging to get there, how might we think about our journey? So strategy one, lift and shift. I'm sure you've all heard about lift and shift and have probably thought about what you want to do here. Now, the basic idea is that you want to be able to move applications while making very minimal changes, or in fact, probably, hopefully, no changes at all. Even though you're not really making a massive modernization of your application, you're actually still able to get a lot of benefits by moving these applications to the cloud, even in a lift and shift manner. So what are some of the examples? Well, you no longer have to manage the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about the servers. So why might that be interesting? Well, we actually just last week announced that we're coming out with the latest Intel CPUs. And so sometimes you might find that you have workloads that want the latest and greatest hardware. And normally in an environment, you'd have to actually decide, well, I'm going to do a hardware refresh cycle, go buy that hardware. Now you don't have to worry about it. That's automatically happening in the background. You'll get access to the latest CPUs, the latest GPUs, and then infrastructure refresh cycle is taken care of for you. Another thing that we hear oftentimes from customers is on-premise, you're used to thinking about buying the amount of hardware because you're going to have it for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, your standard depreciation cycle. And you want to size it so that you can grow into it. Well, earlier today, you heard Brad talk about the fact that we're now announcing 12 terabyte VMs. Well, so on-prem, you might actually have to buy a machine like that right up front. But you're not going to use it for 6 months, 9 months, maybe even a year, but you want to actually build ahead. When you're in the cloud, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You actually build it, you deploy the instance when you actually need it. And if you only need a 4 terabyte instance today, then that's great. And so it really is pay by the use. Not just by when you have applications running in your virtual machine, but actually when you need the requirement. And for a lot of enterprise workloads, these larger scale requirements are challenging to deal with on premises. And then the final thing is on the security front. So the last 18 months or so, we've been hit with just a rash of CPU vulnerabilities. You've probably heard of them as Spectre and Meltdown. These are arguably the biggest vulnerabilities and CPU security issues that the industry has ever seen. And what this meant is just a massive upgrade of operating systems, of firmware, sometimes chip refreshes. And these are all things that a cloud provider can take care of for you. And we've fortunately been able to do it in a way that's been non-disruptive. So these are just a few examples, and probably and hopefully many of these reasons resonate with you already. But just to kind of demonstrate that even a lift and shift can have a lot of value to an organization in your first step to get to the cloud. So to recap, lift and shift, oftentimes the most pragmatic approach to take. Think about your third-party applications where you don't have source code. You're not going to rewrite them. You're not going to make massive changes to them. Sometimes you might actually have the source code, but they were written by a developer 15 years ago. It works fine. That person doesn't work at the company anymore. You probably don't want to touch it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. A lot of times these applications just don't make sense to try to spend a lot of money to modernize. And so a lift and shift really is the best and really, again, the only pragmatic solution. Now, you might find sometimes you have applications where you want to move to the cloud, and you could take a small step forward in modernization, maybe what sometimes people refer to as a lift and modernize or lift and refactor. So let's say you're running MySQL on-premise. Well, instead of just moving MySQL into a VM in GCP, you could move it to Cloud SQL. So now it's a managed service. You still didn't have to change the applications that are talking to the database because it's still MySQL. But you no longer have to manage the life cycle of the database itself. And so now, basically, going away from having to manage the infrastructure to also not having to manage some of the software. This is another small step that you can take as you go to the cloud. In these cases, like, for example, Cloud SQL or Cloud Memory Store or Dataproc, these are all the upgrades and the patching and the backup is taken care of for you. But you might decide, well, there's some applications where lift and shift isn't right. These are some things that I do want to invest in moving forward. And so you might think, OK, I want to improve and move. So this might be a case where you want to start modernizing the application. You're containerizing them. And as you've built out the applications, you want to have some orchestration capabilities. And you want to manage it using Kubernetes. And that's great. As you heard in the keynote earlier today, this strategy with GCP is more viable than ever through Anthos and the associated products that we're coming out with. The idea with Anthos is that now you can actually start thinking about modernizing, and you may modernize on-prem, but know that you have a very clear path to be able to take that same application that's managed now in this one way and do it the same way if you're moving it to GCP or to another cloud. And it really is a great path to help you if you want to take this improve and then move journey to the cloud. Now, when might be some cases that you would choose this path versus going directly to the cloud? Well, maybe you have some dependencies on storage or some other on-premise infrastructure that's hard to move. Or it could be you have a very large database. There's other pieces of software, data, systems that kind of tether you a little bit to on-premise. And that's understandable and reasonable. You might also decide that for these applications, you still want to rewrite them and take that baby step. And so now, once you start migrating, then you're well positioned for that next step in the future. And of course, there's a third strategy. You'll have a small number of applications where these are pretty strategically important. These might be core to your business, but as your business has grown, you've realized you need to actually really scale them. This is something that you want to run as efficiently as possible as your business grows, 50%. Doubles, triples, that you really need to scale, and you're going to have to take the investment to rewrite them, to modernize them. And then the rebuild strategy would certainly be the right decision here. Oftentimes, this is something that a lot of people come to GCP for, but it's just one tool in the tool chest. And so actually, this is something that as we look at it, we recognize that most enterprises are super complex. You have very diverse, heterogeneous environments. You may have hundreds or thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of applications and workloads. And so obviously you can't pick, or you shouldn't pick, the same approach for every single application. So the question is, try to decide what do you want to do. Do you want to lift and shift some workloads? Do you want to, and so basically what you're going to do is migrate first and then modernize? Or do you actually want to modernize first and then migrate? Or in some cases, just go all the way? So ultimately, your decision-making is going to be largely based on a bunch of different constraints and factors. So how complex is it? How critical is it to the business? What does the architecture look like? Do you have time? Do you have the budget? Do you have the staff? Do you have the expertise? All of these are trade-offs. And so thinking about this is a pretty critical part of having a successful migration when you're trying to move an entire data center or sets of data centers to the cloud. So as I've talked through this, hopefully a lot of you have been thinking and doing a mental inventory. Here are all the applications we have, and this is what we'd want to do around them. And you've come to the realization that there are multiple paths that you're going to have to take. But still, how do I actually get started? What is the first step, and how do I make sure that this is going to be successful? It might be tempting to just jump right in and say, let's go, let's do it. We have a sense of urgency. Our CIO says we got to close down this data center by the end of the year, which I heard from another customer today. So this is a real thing. But given the complexities, it's actually really important to take the time, be thoughtful, and actually plan how you're going to do it. We hear over and over again that migrations are long. Some of them are delayed. Some of them over budget. Some of them we've heard from in other vendors' cases are unsuccessful because they didn't really understand what they were doing and trying to make a good business case around it. So the framework that we recommend is really pretty systematic. Start with discovery and assessment. Try to figure out what applications do you have? What are the dependencies? How does it matter to the business? What do you want to do with them? And then do that analysis first. Then start planning. Really trying to figure out what you should move, what order you should move them, what dependencies there are, and so on. Then you actually do the migration. Oftentimes, this part is pretty easy. For a lot of applications, it's pretty straightforward if you've done all your homework up front. And then finally, optimize. Sometimes people try to do it all at once and try to optimize right from the get-go. I would recommend move them first, certainly move some applications first, and then worry about trying to optimize them in place so you don't try to tackle too many problems all at once. And in particular, if you're new to cloud or new to GCP, pick something relatively easy and simple. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you might make some of those decisions. But really, you want to actually get a beachhead, get some successes, earn some credibility in your organization, demonstrate that this is something you can do, and then refine over time. It really builds trust, builds confidence, and it's super important to have a successful long-term migration story. So, assessment. In this phase, really, we're just trying to figure out what applications are best to move first. So you're trying to figure out what the business cases are, estimate how much it costs on-prem, how much do you think it would cost in the cloud, figure out, like I said earlier, which migration strategy you actually want to use. And here, there's a lot of different criteria you might choose to look at. And one thing that sometimes people realize later as they've gone through it, or if they have experience with it, is it's also not just about the infrastructure that you have, but it's also things like licenses. What licensing policies do you have from your different software vendors? Are they certified to run on different platforms? What do you have to deal with in terms of compliance and security? These are all considerations that you should be looking at when you're trying to decide what applications to move, because you don't want to start doing your plan and then realize, oops, we didn't figure this out, and then all of a sudden you've delayed the process. So if you go through this process and you look at a bunch of applications, you might sort them in this way. I mean, there's a lot of different bucketing techniques you could use, but you might say, okay, here are the ones that are non-critical business applications, or these are not tightly connected to the rest of the infrastructure, like test dev workloads, or maybe some experiments that you run. In some cases, this could be your web footprint. These are applications that are probably easiest, safest to learn with and start first. Then you move to something a little bit more challenging, things that are connected, so they're dependencies. There could be, some of them, like the batch processing is maybe not too hard to move, but it's important, but it just needs some amount of data to process on. But it otherwise is relatively separate from the business. And then finally, you have your really challenging ones. These are the highly interdependent, highly connected, very critical to business workloads. It doesn't mean that you won't move them, but you shouldn't actually try them first, right? You should think ahead and understand what do you need to do to be successful with those migrations, but don't try to tackle the hardest problem right away. So once you've done the sorting and now you have a good sense for your footprint, you can actually start thinking about your plan. So the first step, create a cloud foundation. So this is something where there's analogs to this as if you were building a new data center. Like you think about, well, what's your network going to actually look like? How's your power and cooling? Well, in the cloud world, you don't have to think about exactly those things, but you do still have to think about your network. What kind of networks do you want to have? What does the topology look like? What are the subnets that you want to create? What kind of firewall rules do you want? This is part of what you want to figure out, ideally, up front. But in addition to that, you need to think about other entities and kind of resources in the cloud. So starting with user identities. How are you going to decide who accesses the cloud? And then almost immediately after that, how do they map to various resources? So who has permissions to do what? Do you have groups of administrators, developers, admins, people responsible for, say, backup? How do you actually map those groups and those users onto roles and all the permissions and capabilities and what they can access and what they can't access? This is obviously super critical for security, but it's important to actually think through this so you don't have to make a bunch of changes later on in the process. So then the next step is start thinking about how you're actually going to migrate. And like many projects, iterating is a good idea here. Pick a small, reasonable number of applications to start moving. So going back to your categorization of applications, pick maybe 10 or 20 and figure out what do you need to do to move those successfully, put together a plan, and then make that happen. Then in your next wave, pick a larger number. Go to 20 or 40 or 50. The right number is up to you. But the thing at this point that you have to start remembering is the plan involves the rest of your organization. Oftentimes, the owners of these applications, the people who care about these applications, they sit somewhere else in the organization, and you're going to have to coordinate with them. You may have to coordinate with security. And this is where the planning really kicks in. At the end of the day, this is a huge project management effort. And if you don't look at it that way, then you will realize it's a huge project management effort. Which leads to something that is the non-technical thing that is really important, which is, at the end of the day, this is change management. You're fundamentally deciding you're going to do something different in your organization, and that is, instead of running things on-prem, you're going to the cloud. There's a lot of things that you realize are different already today. There are a number of things you'll realize later that are different. How you're actually doing billing and going from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. You have the ability to actually decentralize a lot of decision-making. All these things are great, but they're different. And it's important at this point to really think about who are the key stakeholders that I have to get aligned with, make sure that they are on board. Because a lot of times what happens is if you're leading the migration effort, you're trying to push these migrations, but then you're realizing the team that's responsible for running that application, they have other commitments, they have other dependencies, they have other due dates, or you need to do a migration and they can't take any downtime. So how do you plan? This becomes super, super challenging. And so at the end of the day, making sure that you have a champion, that you have an organization-wide goal, these are things that I think are some of the common traits that I've seen among customers who've been the most successful with a really large-scale migration. And later on, we'll have the benefit of having Jon and Harish here because they really are the champions in their org, and it's been helpful for them to be successful. So now, as we start going through the migration, there's a lot of different workloads, and you should think about, for each of the application types, how are you going to actually do the migration? So this might be, say, VMs, Windows, databases like SAP. It could be just migrating data. And so each of them are going to have a different set of tools and approaches. So the most common one that we suggest people start with is just migrating VMs, because they're already in a kind of a state that you move them to something like GCE. And although the API's interface is a little bit different, the general concepts are very familiar. So with Velostrada, this is a tool that enables you to do large-scale migrations. And so if you're doing the 10, 20, 40, later hundreds or 200 or 300 migrations, you want to be able to have it automated. You don't want to do them one at a time. And so having an orchestration tool that can help you with the migration becomes super valuable. With Velostrada, there's some streaming technology that allows you to actually do a migration with minimal downtime. So typically, you can start actually running the VM in cloud in less than 10 minutes. And basically, because you don't have to wait for all the data to get streamed to GCP before you start running the VM. And so this is great from an agility and from a speed standpoint. But what it also allows is the ability to do some testing. And if things happen to not go right, for example, you've started moving a workload and you realized, oh, there was a dependence, it was dependent on another VM that you didn't realize you needed to move, but it's hard to move that other workload, then you can actually fail back without actually having to reconstruct the entire application. And so these kinds of capabilities really help reduce the risk and give you confidence that you can actually have a successful migration. Moving from VMs, you might now think about databases. As you can tell, Google cares a lot about migration, and so we recently announced another acquisition of a company called Illuma. And this is still very early on, but the idea here is we want to, just like we did with Velostrada helping you migrate VMs, we want to help you with migration of data and databases. And so stay tuned in the coming months for more information about kind of what we're advancing with the Illuma product. And then beyond the databases, there's actually the data itself. Now you can stream data, you can copy data up into GCP, but for many customers, we find that they have large amounts of data that they need to move, and so just having the data transfer appliance comes in handy. You may want to move, it comes in multiple form factors, so if you have, say, hundreds of terabytes of data, you can take one of these appliances, put them in your data center, rack it up, put the data on there, get it compressed, ship it to us, and then it'll get uploaded. And so this is just a way to streamline the migration of data to GCP. So if you kind of look back at some of the things I've talked about so far, what are some of the important, really important takeaways? The first thing is really think about where is the best place to start with your migration. And again, a lot of times, low criticality VM is a great place to start. Not the only way to go, but it's a good place to start if you want to do a big migration journey. The second thing is, a lot of this is about increasing likelihood of success. Trying to avoid the potential pitfalls. So think about what testing you can do, what happens if things don't go well, but just put the time into doing the planning. But this is, this still may seem pretty hard and challenging, and honestly it is. It's pretty complex. But just remember that you have a lot of partners out there who can help you with it. So Google's PSO team has put together a program called Cloud Sprints. So the basic idea is to have the PSO team come in and help you with these initial phases of the migration and get that early success under your belt. So the PSO team can, basically have several people come in and over the course of a week, work through a lot of these issues, like trying to do the assessment, building your cloud foundation, and then start moving some workloads so that you can actually confidently say, oh, I know how this is going to work, and avoid a lot of the pitfalls that people might run into if they're trying it for the first time. Beyond PSO, there are many other organizations and partners who help us, ranging from full service SIs and GSIs to help with all sorts of different parts of migration. Many of you may already partner with them for other purposes in your organization. There's also a bunch of tooling vendors, folks like Cloud Physics and Stratazone, Risk Networks, and Cloudimize. And they have tools that help you with this migration process, which we think are extremely valuable in ensuring that you have success. But now, rather than just hearing from me, I think it's a great opportunity to hear from a couple experts who've been through this before, and they probably have some battle scars that they can rely on. So first, I'd like to introduce Jon Latshaw, who's Vice President for Cloud Services at Cardinal Health.
Hey, Jack.
Hey, Jon, good to see you.
Thanks.
So Jon, can you tell us a little bit about Cardinal Health and the business you're in?
Yeah, well, first let me ask a question. Who's heard of Cardinal Health? Really? That's more than usual. Extra credit if anybody can tell me what they do. Okay, we're not an insurance company. We actually distribute pharmaceuticals and medical services and products, and our mission statement is we want to make healthcare more effective and efficient. So we don't actually interact with patients, but we enable healthcare providers to provide more effective, efficient care. So large company, Fortune 14 this year, I think, about $140 billion worth of revenue, 90 countries, 600 remote sites. Approximately our footprint looks something a little like about 10,000 VMs, give or take.
Okay. So you talked about the size of the footprint with about 10,000 VMs. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what are some of the other applications and workloads that you have in your data centers?
We're just like pretty much every other non-West Coast company, I would characterize it that way. We've got SAP, we've got HR applications, we've got manufacturing applications, productivity, you name it, about 1,300 applications in total. Recently, we did an analysis and we found out that our top 5 applications make up about 80% of our revenue processing. And that was kind of eye-opening. We knew they were important, but we didn't know they were that important, which has generated our approach of, as we're migrating, we're going kind of a dual approach, which would be for those top 5, we're actually spending a lot more time and effort to rebuild where we can. Some of them are legacy and we're modernizing, automating as much as we can. And then for the other like 1,295, we're doing a lift, lightly optimize, and shift. So kind of a hybrid approach for Jack, what Jack described earlier.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about like what prompted the migration to the cloud for Cardinal?
Yeah, there was a couple things. You know, really what it boils down to is, as I've participated in a couple of these sessions, and I was here last year, and a recurring theme is underlying a lot of these talks, and it was really about speed. But we didn't know that going into it, right? So it's hey, we want to make changes. We want to, you saw the slide from Gartner, spend 70% keeping the lights on. But what led us to it really is we wanted to reduce our IT costs. We have a stated goal of we're getting out of our primary data center the end of this calendar year. So we really want to get out of the data center business and not worry about the day-to-day of power, cooling, hardware, hypervisors, those kind of things. And then we also think that being in the cloud, we can modernize much faster, because really the infrastructure as a service is just a starting point for us. We realize we want to get to microservices, we want to get to services, we want to get to containers, and so on.
Great. So tell us about the migration. How's it been going so far?
Good. It's been, we were able to pull in the schedule by 9 months. So originally we forecasted it was going to be a 3-year effort, and we're going to wrap up 99% of the migration in July of this year. And a couple really important things coming up, milestones. In June, we're going to migrate our e-commerce platform. That's $50 billion in revenue for us. So if I'm not here next year, you know why, or I might be. No, I'm kidding. We're good. It's a little white knuckle, but we're really testing it. I got to say, Google's been an exceptional partner in this, helping us through things. It goes without saying, very smart people work for Google, and they've been really helpful in helping us identify ways we can optimize or maybe do things different, because, you know. I just turned 29, so no, I'm kidding. Older than that, but I've been doing this for a while, and I've been thinking about cloud for more than 4 years exclusively. But even then, I still find myself kind of falling back into the old way of doing things, and it's helpful. Google has that immersive talent that'll help me think a little differently.
Great. Well, so things are going great, but like, what are some of the things that were surprises along the way? In the migration, things that are maybe the lessons that you'd want to share with the audience for us today?
The phases that Jack put up there was assess and plan, and then migrate and optimize. If you spend 80% of your effort on assess and plan, the migrate and optimize will go very well. We're, I don't think, any different from most companies, but we had, for example, our CMDB, we set a goal of, we want 100% completion rate to get all fields about servers and applications and databases all filled in. So we did, 100% completion rate. We didn't think about the accuracy rate of it. And so when we started to go, hey, we want to pick this app up and we want to move it, and we need to know what it talks to and what databases are involved and what the data flows are, we were probably maybe 50% accurate in our CMDB. So check. I would say double, triple check, work with the application owners, talk to everybody and say, is this everything, because we moved an application and the application owner was right there with us, and it didn't work, right? We brought it up, getting errors, things are failing. They're like, oh yeah, I forgot about those 3 other databases over here that we take feeds from. So, rolled it back, but it's live and learn. And then the second one is culture change. It is a big change, and some people love it, think you should do it right now or should have done it years ago, and some people are like, why do we have to do this? We're a big company, we can run this stuff at scale, we can do it just as well as Google. I can tell you, we had that going into this, and over time, just training usually helps people understand it's not magic, they're not here to take your job, it's just we're going to do things differently, right?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jon. Appreciate
Thank you.
the time. Thanks.
It's good seeing you.
So Jon has a session also on Thursday where they're going to actually talk about the process of thousands of VMs being migrated. So hope you can attend that one. And so now I want to bring up Harish. So Harish is the cloud services delivery pillar lead at Schlumberger. Welcome.
Hi.
So he's been leading the digital transformation and app modernization efforts for Schlumberger's IT organization.
Thank you for that introduction, and I hope I don't get in your way with the reception for a long time.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about Schlumberger?
So I'm not going to ask how many people know Schlumberger, because for people who are not from the oil and gas services domain, Schlumberger is one of the world's largest oil and gas prospecting services company. And in short, we kind of design, invent, engineer, apply technology for our customers to find and produce oil and gas safely and efficiently. And we are operating in more than 85 countries.
Great. So just like Cardinal Health, Schlumberger also decided that you were going to shut down some of your data centers as part of a move to the cloud. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what was driving that decision for you?
Sure. So I would say primarily digital transformation is a buzzword. It was also something that we took on, came from our leaders, from EVP of technology, and from the CIO and director of infrastructure, director of business systems, and that was the primary reason. And the secondary reason, like Jon mentioned, we wanted to reduce our capex and opex around infrastructure hosting as well.
So, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that originally you were thinking about doing just a lift and shift and starting with that approach. But you've kind of, during this process, you've learned some things and kind of landed in a different path. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, as you can see in the image or the banner behind me, courtesy our technology center in Pune, when we started our journey way back in 2015, 2016, we were under the impression that 80% of our workloads are going to be lift and shift. And as we went through our discovery, our assessments, our pilot migrations, it became more clear that lift and shift is not an easy undertaking. And this might be contradicting to what you just presented. The thing that we learned is when you have a large organization like us, and a lot of legacy in our on-prem data centers, we have different tools being used for backup, monitoring in our third-party data centers. And when we move them to the cloud, the tools change, and they have registry conflicts. So it becomes a more effort after you move if you're doing a lift and shift. So we changed our strategy to be more greenfield, which allowed us to kind of have fresher infrastructure in the cloud, address technology debt, as well as security gaps as well.
No, even though your approach is different, I certainly recognize it, because this is the whole point about enterprises being complex, and you have to figure out what makes sense for your organization by taking the time to look into it. So can you talk a little bit about what are some of the main lessons that you've learned from this journey?
I was listening to Jon, and actually, even though it's two different industries, the things are so common, right? But I will highlight one point, is there's a focus session tomorrow, which kind of touches upon the lessons learned and stuff. But in short, from my perspective, there are top 5 lessons that I would say is, one, the organization should have a common goal to move to the cloud. it is a mindset and a culture change. So there has to be investment done in spreading awareness of what the benefits of a cloud migration is, and that's important. The second I would say is, like Jon mentioned, a thorough discovery. And I would say it has to be twofold. One, at infra level, to know what volume of your infrastructure can be moved to the cloud. That builds your business case first. And then you get into an application level assessment, which tells you that, okay, what are the integrations, what data connections are back, how much of volume of data is being exchanged, so that when you pick up one application, you're picking up all related applications along with it, so that you get the value out of it. And this can affect your migration strategies as well. The third, I would say, is something that we learned the hard way, is focus on setting up a strategy for your cloud operations if you're doing an infrastructure as a service migration. So strategy and requirements around how do you want to do backups, how do you want to do monitoring once you have moved to the cloud. So that's important, and you should spend some time on that. The fourth, I would say, in the same manner, is to have a central team, one for cloud architecture, so that as you know, I mean, every 15 days or 30 days, things are changing in the cloud. So you need to have a central team focusing on cloud architecture. You need to have, on the same lines, a delivery team that provides those services back to the internal stakeholders as well. I'm kind of showcasing my team here. The other thing I would say is cloud operations, which I mentioned. And the fourth important thing would be service automation and management. In short, that would mean that once you move it, how would you manage it? You know, what sort of services can you automate? Can you shut down your VMs which are not being used and all that stuff? So those are the four things I would say. Okay. And lastly, and not to forget, cloud is pay-per-use. If you don't keep a close tag on what you're tagging, how the billing is worked, you could probably get a big bill at the end of the day. So that would be the thing that I would focus on.
Okay, great. So one of the things that you've shared with me before is that you know, like trying to decide what you want to do in-house versus with partners. And I think, you know, in the beginning of your migration, you work with some partners. So if you were to do this all over again, like how would you approach, you know, kind of using partners versus, you know, choosing not to do them? What would you recommend to people?
So keeping aside Google, partnership, which we'll continue to embrace, we did use partners for our assessments and migrations as well. If I had to redo it again, I would say that I would focus on tools available to first understand the volume of infrastructure that can be moved to the cloud, and also look at tools that can provide me application insights. Once we have that data, then bringing in a partner to see whether it makes sense in doing app modernization or whether it makes sense in doing lift and shifts or rebuilds, that's where I would look at partners for. And of course, I have to say that having said that, our long-term strategy is to build the cloud capabilities in-house. So we would continue to do that as well.
Okay, great. Well, so just the last question to kind of wrap up. I mean, you know, I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Schlumberger in many parts of the organization. I think there's a lot of things that are common between our companies in terms of being technology companies, trying to innovate in our industries. But I was curious if you could share a little bit more about what you found out of your partnership with Google and how has it been so far?
So our engagement with Google goes way back from the early stages of our journey. And you know, if you had the lead architect standing here, she would say that we've come a long way from where we started. Our infrastructural foundation and our security foundation is really there right now. And the Google engineering, I will, of course, call out, and most of the companies will say this, that the Google engineering is the best. They have helped us through this journey to reach where we are. And some of the examples of those collaborations are, I would say, the Google HSM, shared VPC, and the continued work on internal GKE. Those are essential features for any enterprise.
Okay. Great. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you and looking forward to many more years of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harish. So there will also be a session tomorrow, 12:35 on Schlumberger, what they've been doing. I don't think it's actually officially in the title, so you might miss it, but I encourage you to go attend that talk. And we have the speaker sitting in the front here as well. So just a few parting thoughts. Again, thank you for coming to the session. Hopefully you found it helpful. I think, as you go down this path, the first thing that often you're doing is deciding what cloud are you going to use. We hope that you will continue to be looking at Google Cloud. There's a number of things to remember to consider. So there's obviously the speeds and feeds and the features, the technology. And so from an infrastructure standpoint, we can go on and on about that. There are many, many sessions to talk about the capabilities that we have in the cloud. Honestly, I would also say that in the last couple of years, we've invested a lot in really trying to hit all the capabilities that are necessary for enterprises. Not just the very basics, but the things that actually allow you, like today, Brad in his keynote also announced access transparency. These are the kinds of things where large enterprises want to understand who's accessing your data because it matters to you and to your customers. And so these are the kinds of enterprise-grade capabilities that we've been adding to the platform. And we think we're in a great spot now to take your, all the workloads, your most critical, your biggest, baddest workloads, and bring them to GCP. Secondly, is around openness. This was very much a highlight of the keynote today. For those of you who've been at Next in the past, we talk about it every year. Being open is part of our DNA. It's part of our culture. We do a lot of work with open source, and it's something that fundamentally we truly believe in. And so trying to make sure that we have solutions that allow you to actually not feel locked in, to work with partners, whether it's on, say, like the announcements about the partner databases and solutions, or it's around things like Anthos. These give you the opportunity to really have a solution where you write applications and build applications in one location, but you can run them anywhere. We hear this over and over again that this is important. It's something for risk mitigation, and it's something we embrace fully. And then finally, partnership. This is also something that we take to heart. We do work with customers as partners, and I think that's important. So going back to the migration, if you think again about just making sure that you're treating this like the big project and challenge that it is, take the time to actually do the planning, figure out what you need to do, and then try to decide by application, what do you want to move first? What do you want to modernize? Do you want to take a lift and shift approach? Do you want to do something more aggressive? As Harish was saying, perhaps in your environment, it makes more sense to redo a lot of the services and the operational pieces of what you're doing. So, the applications maybe need to get changed a little bit if you want to really move them along. But ultimately, I hope you can learn a lot from some of the trailblazers who've been there before you. So really doing the assessment, this is something that comes up over and over and over again. And it is really important. So if you really walk away with one thing, this is probably the thing to remember, is understand the applications, the dependencies, because again, you want to actually have a successful migration that's on time, that's under budget. I actually can't believe Jon said their migration finished 9 months sooner than they planned. That's unheard of. But I know that they've spent a lot of time going through this, being very careful and planning. And then they work their butts off. Make sure you go through the right architecture, and then think about the change management and the culture change. Really, you want to get the right team, build the relationships. This is going to require something across your entire organization to pull together in order to really be successful. So I think these are hopefully been some stories and some tips. I wish you all the best in your migrations, and hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.